And they happily told me that, I already paid off my flat. And I paid off with my CPF. And
Lump sum.
Lump sum. They were very happy about it. And I was like, okay, uncle, auntie, that is not exactly a very good idea.
Property in 20 is a podcast series that discusses anything and everything related to real estate in episodes of at least 20 minutes or more. And once again, this podcast series is brought to you by Ceekay Soh District. Hi there, welcome to another episode of Property in 20. And today the topic that we're going to talk about here will be about CPF Accrued Interest. So now before we begin, the reason why we have chosen this topic is because we realize a lot of HDB owners especially, they are not so aware of the impact of CPF Accrued Interest. Right, so that is why today I have one of my team member, Grace, who will be sharing with you her insights on CPF Accrued Interest. Let's welcome Grace.
Yep.
Hi, Grace.
Hi.
Good to have you on the show. So I have some questions for you, right? So maybe let's begin with the most straightforward question, right? The first thing first, can you explain to everyone what is CPF Accrued Interest all about?
Okay, CPF Accrued Interest is the interest earned on the CPF savings of Singaporeans and permanent residents if the amount hadn't been used for housing. So the interest is actually computed on the CPF principal amount withdrawn for housing, including the monthly housing installments, right, at the current CPF ordinary account interest rate of 2.5% per annum, and this is compounded yearly. So for the benefits of our overseas friends, right, who have no idea what CPF actually means, CPF refers to Central Provident Fund. All right, it is a mandatory social security savings scheme we have here in Singapore. Okay, it actually makes employees contribute to their own CPF ordinary account. All right, and it actually helps them to save up for their retirement, their housing, and their healthcare needs. In terms of the 2.5% per annum that I've mentioned earlier on, right, this is actually the prevailing rate right now. So it is subject to quarterly changes, quarterly review as well.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. So if I'm not wrong, right, usually for this CPF interest, if let's say you don't use it at all, you keep the money in your OA, is it right to say that the government will be the one paying you this 2.5% interest?
Yes, you're correct to say so.
Okay. So then when it comes to properties, right, now for most Singaporeans, what they like to do here is they tend to use their CPF, for the down payment, for the loan installment and so on. So what is the implication of using this CPF? Like let's say for example, if they want to buy a property and they use CPF to pay for every single month's monthly installment in full, what would be the implication?
Okay, so what I can think of is that in terms of implication, right, it would be the reduced retirement savings, because ultimately CPF savings is meant to provide for retirement. And if let's say you use this CPF funds, right, for your housing needs, then it would mean to say that there'll be lesser CPF balance for your retirement savings. So potentially, homeowners that actually use most of their CPF, right, they're looking at lower retirement income and possibly a delay in terms of the retirement. And then secondly, it will be the accumulated accrued interest. So just now you mentioned that, if let's say they hadn't used the amount, right, then the government will be the one giving them the 2.5% per annum. But right now, because they are using the amount, so instead of the government giving them the 2.5% per annum, they are the ones, if let's say they were to sell their flat, right, then they will need to top up the interest on their own. Yeah, including the principal amount. So everything they need to pay back on their own, using their own funds. And when that happens, right, then for homeowners that are not earning a lot, right, it's because some of them, the reason why they're even using CPF in the first place is because they don't have enough cash. But the more they use it, then they realize that, by the time when they really need to sell their flat, right, they have to return even more to their own CPF.
Right.
Yeah, correct.
Right. Okay. So just now, if I never hear you wrongly, is that you mentioned, right, that eventually when they sell off, they have to pay back this CPF amount, right, this with accrued interest. Can I assume that, let's say, if the property, the appreciation can cover more than enough of the interest is not an issue?
Yes, provided the property can appreciate enough and fast enough to cover the CPF accrued interest.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So what happens if it doesn't cover?
If it doesn't cover, then we could potentially run into a negative sales situation, right? Because, the concept of negative sales situation is whereby the sales proceeds is unable to fully repay the outstanding loan and the accrued interest. And in this case, right, then owners will have to use other sources of funds to actually repay that amount. In terms of properties, right, which is more likely to run into a negative sales situation, I would say that most of the time it is HDB. Okay, because in the first place, HDB is meant to be affordable. All right, so the government will do their best to keep HDB affordable. And as a result, in terms of the price growth, right, for HDB, we don't see as much as compared to private properties. That's the reason why, HDB owners, they have a higher chance of running into a negative sales situation. But it does not mean to say that private owners don't. All right, so for private owners, right, if let's say they own resale condominiums that are possibly older, much older, and it's a leasehold, maybe 20 plus years old right now, then they could be running into the same situation as well because their property will not appreciate fast enough, right, to keep up with the accrued interest.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the key thing is that, like, I heard a lot of comments saying, isn't CPF accrued interest still our own money, right? So if we sell the house, shouldn't it be an issue because everything will go back? So just now you mentioned that, let's say, for example, if HDB enter into negative sale, right, and there is a shortfall, then what will happen if, let's say, they don't have enough money to top up? What will happen?
Based on what I've heard, all right, is that you actually need to write into CPF. Okay, with this shortfall that you cannot cover, right, they might actually like cancel it off. All right.
Okay, that means they waive off lah.
Correct.
Okay.
But at the same time, it will also mean to say that this amount, right, that initially if you hadn't taken out, it could have earned you the interest for your retirement savings.
Right.
But now, because you have taken it out, you've used it, and right now you cannot cover the shortfall, you are losing this potentially 200-300K of worth of retirement savings.
Okay, so which means to say that that amount, that shortfall that was supposed to be yours, it will be so-called written off and vanish into thin air.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds quite scary because I feel that for a lot of HDB owners, right, because if they don't know this, by the time they want to sell, they think that, well, I can sell for a profit, but only to realize that this accrued interest thing is stopping them from getting back any cash proceeds at all. Yeah,
Yes.
so maybe, in your so-called experience so far, have you come across clients or any examples of negative sale that leave a very deep impression on you?
I have, but it is not yet a negative sales situation, but very close already, because there was this day whereby I went for my door knocking session, all right, and I ran into this couple. So I wanted to share with them about CPF accrued interest, and then he stopped me right there. He was like, yeah, I know about it. So I was like, okay, like, how is it that you know about it? So he shared with me that, you know what, just in the last month, right, he tried to sell his place. Yeah. So at the beginning, he didn't know about CPF accrued interest, and his property agent didn't advise him. So it was only till the later stage whereby he was already ready to sell. And then they did a quick financial calculations, and the property agent was so upset, and he told me that they were all so disappointed, upset, because they realized that they only have 2,000 left worth of sales proceeds. After we minus off the outstanding loan, the accrued interest, the agent fee, and other miscellaneous costs, he's only left with 2,000. So he told me that 2,000, I cannot even cover my renovation. Then he's like, he was like, so should I even move right now? I cannot even move. And then I told him that, you know what? Okay, so in that case, perhaps you have to work on, building more income, because he's really stuck in this situation. And what shocked me was that this wasn't a resale homeowner. He actually bought it during BTO.
Wow.
Yeah, so it is actually very rare, because most of the time right now, right, when we think about it, we will think that, BTO homeowners, right, naturally you will definitely profit because it's a subsidized unit, right? You sell, you confirm will make money. But it's not the case for this owner, because he held on to this unit for close to 20 years.
Oh, no wonder, 20
Yes,
years.
correct. And the worst part is that I asked him, so did you actually use all of your CPF? And then he told me that yes. He said, I used all my CPF for my down payment, my stamp duty, my monthly mortgage installment. And I was like, I was shocked. I have no idea how to help him. And I was like, okay, then in that case, you really have to start, making changes. But I think he's sort of like given up because the accrued interest is too much. Yeah, it's just too much. And it wasn't just this homeowner. There was another one, in fact, in the same estate. This is a different owner. They bought it at resale. Alright, so this couple, they were asking me like, what's the transacted prices right now for the estate? And then when I shared with them, they were shocked as well. They were like, huh? That's like the same price as I paid 10 years ago. So I was like, okay. So in terms of negative sales situation, right, it's not just in terms of how much your CPF accrued interest or your principal amount that you withdrawn, how much it has rolled, but also in terms of the property price, right? Just now we mentioned how fast it actually increased. And then I realized that, for this estate, right, it's not appreciating fast enough. Yeah, in fact, for the past 10 years, right, they haven't been making money. Yeah, so that is why, it contributed to this. Yeah, and when I advised this couple, they were like, okay, they probably would want to look into somewhere else because they know that this place is not earning them money anymore.
Okay. I think this sounds really scary for me to hear that a BTO owner can only see $2,000 sales proceeds. All right. So what I gathered here from you is that this owner definitely over leveraged in terms of their CPF fund usage. And I think a lot of people underestimate the power of compounding interest. Right? Because like over 20 years, 2.5% is compounded every single year, right? So that makes me wonder, is it a good idea to actually pay off your outstanding HDB loan using a lump sum of your CPF?
Okay, so in terms of this, right, one key thing to take note of is that there's a compounding effect which you mentioned earlier about CPF accrued interest. Okay, so let me give an example. So say for example, they have a 300,000 mortgage loan to pay off. If they choose to pay 1,000 a month, right, over a period of 25 years, then the accumulated accrued interest, right, they're looking to pay off in 25 years will be about 109K. But if today, let's say they decided that, okay, I want to just pay off one shot so that I have no worries, I don't have to think about anything, I don't have to think about this mortgage anymore, then they put in all 300K, what they're potentially looking at is that for the same 25 years, instead of accumulating 109K accrued interest, they are accumulating about 256K.
Wow.
Yeah, that's nearly double. So it is shocking. And why did I even come up with this figure? It's because yesterday I went for another door knocking session.
Okay.
Yeah, and I met this elderly couple and they happily told me that, I already paid off my flat and I paid off like with my CPF. And
lump
they were
sum.
lump sum. They were very happy about it. And I was like, okay, uncle, auntie, that is not exactly a very good idea. Yeah, and I mean, they kept insisting that, it doesn't matter, but I could see the change, in their expression when I shared with them about the accrued interest, and she was like, she paused for a moment and she was like, I think she was trying to digest whatever that I just shared with them.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's a lot to take in, and I wouldn't advise any homeowners to use lump sum, right? If you really want to use your CPF savings because you don't have much cash, right, then what you can do is that pay monthly installment instead. So at least, right, the accrued interest wouldn't roll up so quickly. Yeah, and you wouldn't eat into your sales proceeds if you really need to sell a place in the future.
Right. So then there will be some people who tell you that, okay, like that, then I don't sell my property at all. So what will happen in that case?
Okay, even if you don't sell the property, right, the CPF, you will continue to accumulate the CPF accrued interest. It wouldn't just stop there, right? So it will continue to accumulate, and then you realize that at the end of the day, right, you don't sell your property, whatever potential profits that you can see, what other people are making, right, you're not going to make it because you're not even selling a place. It's locked in your HDB or locked in your property, as well as the accrued interest. Yeah, so by all means, you can do that. But then again, it will mean to say that you need to find other alternatives for your retirement. Because ultimately, we can say that, you know what, I can just keep working. But truth to be said, who can work for like until 70, 80 years old? Do you really want to work till that long, right? Most of us, for now, right, when I look at my cousins, my younger cousins, they're already planning for retirement. Yeah, in their 20s, they are looking for money. So I believe like if right now you're in your 30s, you're in your 40s, you already have a family, you want to think for yourself and your loved ones. You want to, create a legacy as well. You want to leave more for your children. Yeah, you don't want a case whereby you have nothing to leave for them, and then your children will realize that, in the future, right, housing is going to be even more difficult to own a house, right? It's going to be even more difficult to own a place for themselves, and the cycle will just repeat. It's a vicious cycle, in fact. And we realize that a lot when we look at the the different, groups of people, when we see HDB homeowners and when we see private landed homeowners, right, we see a difference because based on the door-knocking sessions that I've been, right, when I went to landed, and I realized that, the parents there, they have a different kind of mindset whereby, you know what, I want to live for my children, right? My place is a freehold, it's a landed, I can leave it for them, they can hold it, they can sell it, or they can buy somewhere else, it's fine, right? At least I have something for them.
Yep.
Yeah, they don't have to worry about their future. But then for HDB homeowners, right, I see two different sides. I have parents whereby they are worried, but they realize they cannot do anything right now because of the accrued interest they have accumulated. And then there are another set of parents whereby they are like, it's okay lah, I will just leave it to my children. They can go and survive on their own. I mean, no harm doing that, right? You can leave it to your children to fight for themselves.
Yeah, the parents like that.
Correct. But it will set them back by many years, many years. And I think for myself, I can really experience that as well. Because I myself, I live in a HDB as well. Yeah, so my mom, she also has this idea that, you guys can go and like fight for your own, you can go and like earn your own income and all that. But ultimately, we realized that at this stage, right, when everybody else is owning a place, you realize that, the rising cost of living, right, is very, very real.
Yep.
Yeah, correct. And if you want to keep up with inflation, the rising cost of living, we have to do something early and not till we are like 40s, 50s. Then we start to think about, where's my retirement savings? So actually, property is, I would say, is one of the ways that, people can actually leverage if they can. Yeah.
I think that's a very good point from you because I feel that a lot of Singaporeans, they kind of underestimated how property can really help them for the long run. Right? Of course, with that being said, if let's say you have, like what you said, many other forms of investments that can help you to make money, for sure. Right? Property is not the only way to make money. But the problem is this, is the majority of the population, I realize, is they are not savvy enough and they are too safe when it comes to their other form of investments. Right, so safe that maybe, for example, they are only making like 4-5% per annum. To them, that's very good already because wow, that is kind of like beating inflation. But when you really think about it, it's still not enough. You're constantly chasing after the numbers, and it just comes to a point whereby property prices will grow way faster than whatever that 4-5% can get you. Right, so 10-20 years down the road, you may think that you have accumulated your wealth, but then you only to realize that wow, it's not enough. Yeah, I think that is a very real problem that you had just brought out just now. Right.
Yep.
So one question I have is that when it comes to private properties, for a negative sale to happen, is the chances very slim, or actually it still does happen for private properties?
Okay, it still does happen. So say for example, okay, if we talk about landed, right, then chances is very low because we have seen how landed prices have increased over the years. And back then landed prices were actually still affordable, right? You still can get a terrace for like 1 million. But right now, I don't think you can really get that price anymore. So it's no longer in the market. But if we look at condominiums, right? Yes, I've actually seen one of the clients, not a negative sale yet, but because their condo is really quite old, it's a 99 years leasehold, and it's really like 25 years old. And pre-COVID, right, the price was already declining. Okay, and because of COVID, we know that in the past 2 to 3 years, prices have skyrocketed because basically, buyers have nowhere else to turn to because of construction delays. So they turn to resale market, and that is where we see whether the property is old or new, right? You have buyers for it. But right now that we are in a post-COVID era, right, I'm not too sure about that. Because if pre-COVID, it was really dropping, could we actually see that prices continue to drop, right, in post-COVID right now? So for this client, right, they actually use their CPF. So they actually have CPF Accrued Interest, though not a lot. But the thing is that the property, right, when they bought it, it was already at 700 PSF. And the lowest it was at pre-COVID was at 600 PSF. So if it tumbles back down to 600 PSF, then it could be possible that they are looking at a loss. And on top of that, because of their CPF Accrued Interest, right, they could be looking at like potentially negative sale situation. Yeah. And I see that happening if, let's say, in terms of resale, right, especially if they bought it at resale for private property owners.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like if they enter a higher price than others, and if the property is so-called old with lower demand, is that what you're saying?
Correct. In terms of the entry price, I think it matters a lot because especially right now, we don't talk about new launches, but we just talk about resale. Lah. If let's say they enter at a higher entry price, right, and they use most of their CPF, and in the future, if let's say it doesn't appreciate because the property is getting older, then the chances of running into a negative sales situation is actually quite high.
Right. I think that is quite true because like we have seen in the resale market, people always think that, I can buy resale because it's so-called cheaper, right? The older ones should still be safe because it is significantly cheaper than the newer ones. But what people always tend to forget is the fact that like demand will also so-called affect the pricing in the future, right? For older properties, unfortunately in Singapore, there tends to be lower demand. Because Singaporeans, they love new things, right? Every few years change phone, every few years change car. So for some reason, somehow when it comes to property, even with HDB, it's the same thing. Like people are willing to pay more for MOP, like just MOP BDO, right? So when it comes to older properties, I think that is exactly where we face that issue, where people tend not to prefer much older condos. Of course, there are still buyers for that. But maybe their profit making to them is also not the biggest concern because they know, I'm buying old property already. But I think what you say as a point is that, however, that could mean that a few years down the road, they may not see a return if they decide to sell. So that's where, to me, maybe this is suitable more for a retirement home, where the profit making, whatever, doesn't really matter. It's just a space to stay in until they pass away, they pass on. But otherwise, for those who's looking to make a profit, that may not be so feasible.
Yes, correct.
So to end off today's session, I have one last question for you. Right. So for a lot of Singaporeans, right, they are likely to be more CPF rich than cash rich, right? Because for a lot of people, like they may not have that much cash savings, especially if, depending on their income, right? Maybe their income is not that high, or maybe based on their lifestyle, they prefer to keep cash to themselves and they just want to use as much CPF as possible, right? But to them, it's like, I have more CPF than cash, so might as well use my CPF, right? So what would be your best advice for them if that is the case, that they have way more CPF than their cash?
Okay, if that's the case, right, then I would have 3 pieces of advice, right? So not just one. First advice is that if they can, right, switch to partial or full cash payment for their monthly housing installment. So at the very least, it will help to reduce their CPF accrued interest. And then secondly is that they can choose to make voluntary CPF housing refunds, especially if they have used a lump sum. All right, so that it will help to reduce the CPF accrued interest by a lot. And on top of that, I think I didn't mention this earlier on, is that in terms of grants, right? Yeah, so grants actually matters as well because I think Singaporeans have this idea that, okay, it's free, I want to take it all. Okay, so yes, grants, yes, it's so-called free, right? You don't have to return to the government. But then again, the moment you take it, right, it's disbursed through your CPF ordinary account. So it means to say that it will also accumulate this accrued interest. Yep. So this will also add on to your accrued interest, and ideally is that if you can, don't take. Yeah, if you take, then just take note of the accrued interest that you're accumulating as well. So second is to make that voluntary CPF housing refund. All right, and then thirdly is that if possible, right now if you are still young and you know that there is still a long way ahead of you, then what you want to do is that you may want to cash out early. All right, and then you want to upgrade to an asset that can give you higher capital appreciation, right? Especially for HDB upgraders, because like we mentioned earlier, in terms of HDB prices, right, it's definitely not going to keep going up because it's meant to be affordable. Yeah, and the government will keep it that way. Otherwise, then the rest of us who cannot afford, right, then there'll be an issue as well.
Yeah. I think this will become a very politically sensitive issue.
Correct.
If, let's say, Singaporeans, majority of them can no longer afford a HDB flat. Right.
Yes.
So I think that is a very good point from you. What I really love is that, like, when you shared about, how people can actually make the voluntary refund, and also about the HDB grants as well. I think for the grant is something that a lot of people take it for granted that it's free one ma, like I might as well just take, right? Puna by puna.
Yes, correct.
But when I talk to my clients, I also share with them that if you can afford to, unless affordability is an issue, then no choice. You have to take the grant to help you to buy. No choice. So be it. But if you are taking for the sake of taking when you actually can afford, then my advice is don't take . right? Because like, end of the day, like, what's the point of accumulating more accrued interest? Then when you want to sell, it becomes like you see lesser cash come back to you when you sell.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
So that is where, in terms of this, like, to this topic, I think it's very, very relevant for a lot of people out there. Right. So CPF accrued interest, I always felt like it is a topic that has been a blind spot for a lot of Singaporeans. Right. Even today, when I look through on TikTok, on Instagram, I still find that I see a lot of comments about CPF and they have a lot of misconception about this topic. All right, so thank you so much, Grace. Thank you for all the insight you've shared today. I think this is super important for people to know. So hopefully for those of you who have, listened to this podcast today, right, like now you can see what are the true impact of CPF accrued interest. Now you can see like why you probably shouldn't over leverage on your CPF, right? Be it in terms of bank loan or CPF, both there will be interest attached to it. All right. The difference will be that in terms of loan wise, right? A lot of people don't know this, by the way. This is just my last bonus sharing for you guys. Loan is actually amortized interest. The longer you take your loan, right, the lesser interest you pay every month. A lot of people don't know this. The interest is being drawn down over time. But just CPF is the opposite. It's compounding interest. And compounding, if you know the idea, it actually increases more and more every single year. Right? So between drawing down your interest versus accumulating even more interest, I think it's clear to see which one you should go for, right? So I will always advise for you to take more loan and pay using cash and reduce your CPF amount that you use for your monthly installment. All right, so that will be the last thing that I want to share with you guys. So thank you, Grace, once again. Thank you so much for being on the show. And I'll see you guys in the next episode of Property in 20. See you around.